18.
Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Smart Money. As we begin the new year, the sentiment on Dalal Street is very upbeat. The number of demat accounts in December hit a record high of almost 42 lakhs, and this is significantly higher than what we saw last month. Now, India is definitely moving up in the ranks of global economic growth, and today we speak to Radhika Gupta, the MD and CEO of Edelweiss Mutual Fund, to talk about her report aptly titled, "Is This India's Decade?" Radhika, thank you so much for joining us here. And Happy New Year to you.
Thank you, and I wish you and all the viewers a very Happy New Year.
Okay, you know, this is not a debate actually. Everyone's talking about it, right? And it seems to be a consensus view
This
now.
is consensus now.
It's India's decade. But I just want you to, for the benefit of our viewer, put a few highlights in front of us before we start the interview. Why do you feel this is India's moment?
So I think India has come of age, you know, from a golden age before 1600s and the East India Company and everything the country went through, to post-independence when we were struggling to find an identity, mixed economy, to now sort of becoming one of the world's largest 5 economies and hopefully the next 3. And I think multiple things are working. One is the young population of India. You know, I hope I represent one of those, but I think we really have a very large demographic dividend at play, something that China had, you know, maybe 15, 20 years ago. And this young population will be creating companies, building companies, consuming data, all of that. So I think demographics are working. The second is, I think, the animal instincts of the private sector, of Indian entrepreneurs who really make India. Whether those entrepreneurs are startups to whether they are large companies, the animal instincts of the private sector are starting to kick in. And the third is, I think, government policy, top down, is aligning with what people want bottom up and what companies want bottom up. So this combination of demographics, companies and policies coming together, I think make it a super exciting place.
Okay, and that has been the case for a while, right? I mean, it's been brewing for the last couple of years where India has been picking up pace. But what are the opportunities that are present right now over the next decade? Where do you see the maximum amount of potential as India is expanding its market size?
So one, and I will talk about specific opportunities, I think one of the greatest things about India is it is not a single sector opportunity over the next decade. When we look at many countries, they could be commodity oriented countries, they could have a single commodity, a single source of income, or 2 or 3 dominant sources of income. But I think as we talk through today, you'll see there's an exciting opportunity in consumption, but there's also an exciting opportunity in financial services. You talked about demat accounts, and there's an equally interesting one in manufacturing, and there's an equally interesting one in defense and space and healthcare. And we can dissect all of these, but the idea is that the opportunity is actually India. It's multi-sectoral.
Okay, you know, in your report, you point out that premiumization is driven by rich Indians, then there's the aspiring Indians that are sort of driving the bottom upside of the market. I want to talk a little more about that. But before that, you also mentioned the comparison with China.
Yeah.
Right? What are the similarities that you see between India now and major global economies, say 15 years ago? Are we in that space where this is a sort of a long-term structural growth story if you compare it to our peers?
So I think the comparison with China is very interesting, and I'll give you a non-economic, a different analogy first. You know, India just got its first set of Apple stores that opened last year in Mumbai and Delhi. Interestingly, Apple opened its first set of stores in China in 2007 and 8, 15 years ago. And when we went back and looked, our GDP per capita today is about $2,700 in India. That was exactly bang where China was 15 years ago. So I don't know if Apple reads this data. But I think the similarities are a couple. One is demographics. I already talked about that. At that point, China really benefited from a young population. I think their demographic dividend will come to an end maybe 20 years before us. China benefited from low labor cost 15 years ago. India has that advantage today. China was a great export story. I think that is emerging. China was a big credit growth story. I think that is emerging. So all these things sort of remind you of the growth story that happened in China 15 years ago. They also remind you of the growth story that happened in the US, by the way, in the late 80s and early 90s.
Okay, so you're saying that we are at a point that China was 15 years ago, and we've seen the kind of disproportionate growth that China has had, right? So how do you capitalize on that? We'll talk about it bit by bit, but what are the major economic growth patterns that are visible to you over the next 5 to 10 years?
So I think there are a couple of themes, and we can talk about them. we should start with consumption. And very often when people look at India, they think of us as $2,700 per capita. But the reality is, Sonia, you know that there are hotel room rates that are 50,000 rupees a night, and there are apartments that get sold at 20 crores. I mean, these can't be the realities of a poor country anymore. And I think India is multiple Indias within one India. What we say is it's three Indias. The top 10% of Indians, we are 140 crore people. The top 10% of Indians, 12 crore of us, are actually living in a rich country. We have a GDP per capita of $12,000. We're saving, we're investing, we're consuming, we're doing discretionary spends, we're the premiumization story. That's us. And by the way, we're going to double in size in the next 6-7 years. So the rich country that is India, that is a sub part of India, should double in the next 6-7 years. And that is super powerful. You have aspiring India, which is the next 10 crore people. And by the way, rich India also accounts for half of India's economy. So 10% of people, half of India's economy. Aspiring India is your next one. Affordable housing, buying their first scooter, opening a first bank account. And then you have a large mass of 120 crore Indians that are the other half of the economy and also represent a low-cost manufacturing basic consumption opportunity. The exciting thing about India is there's an opportunity in premium. There's also a big under-penetrated opportunity in basic.
Okay, I want to bring back that point I made about the number of demat accounts, right? Just quick word over there. It's really exciting to me, the kind of opportunity that we have in terms of financialization of savings. I mean, think about it. Over 40 lakh accounts were opened in the month of December, right? Compared to what, about 25 lakh last month. But that's still, overall, if you look at it, India has what, 14 crore demat accounts in a population of 144 crore people. That's less than 10% of India's population seeing financialization of their savings. So do you see a huge potential there?
It's incredible. So demat accounts, and of course I have to talk mutual funds. 4 crore, so 14 crore demat accounts, 4 crore mutual fund holders, right? Now, if you look at most countries, if you look at the US, equity penetration is virtually all of GDP. In the US, mutual fund penetration as a percentage of GDP is 145%. Global average mutual fund penetration to GDP is 80%. Global average, not US. India is just 16%. So the exciting thing, I always tell people working in our industry that you're working at the best time because we are a large consumer market. We have under-penetration, and yet now people have awareness. So on the sets of a Shark Tank, if I go and ask the crew, how many of you have heard of SIPs? By the way, 90% of people will raise their hand. Now 10% would not have, only 10% would have done SIPs. Large market, awareness is much higher than it was 10 years ago, with tremendous scope to grow. And this is across financial services.
Wow, that's interesting. By the way, I have to have a separate discussion with you on Shark Tank and the big takeaways there. That was a good one, but the episodes are not out yet.
Not yet.
Right? Okay, so we'll wait for that. But let's talk about themes to watch out for this time, right? You spoke about consumption, and I want to talk about that. I went through your report in which you say that, for example, owning a car, right? Only 29 out of 1,000 Indians own a car.
Can you believe that?
And that in China is about 260. In the US, it's more than 500 out of 1,000 people.
Even in Thailand, it's almost 200.
But why do you think that is, A? And B, what do you see as the opportunity there?
So I think we find this surprising, as I said, because we live in rich India. But we just don't realize how diverse the span of India is. And every segment is migrating up. You mentioned the example of cars. I find the example of washing machines really fascinating. If you look at households, less than 20% own a washing machine in India. Now, manual washing doesn't happen in most parts of the world. And eventually, these products are going to filter to the bottom of the pyramid. We find it surprising, as I said, because we live in rich India.
I also think, one of the reasons why, say, a stock like Varun Beverages, right, rose quite a bit. People now have access to electricity. So they have access to fridges. And then they can store something like a bottled Pepsi or something. Right? So that is also important.
People have access to gas, electricity, and data.
And data.
So that creates a whole set of opportunities. It happened in mobile phones. As you said, people have access to electricity. So your washing machine, your fridge, your television, only half the country's households have a television. It just opens up opportunities.
But just trying to play the devil's advocate here, you talk about how consumption of televisions, washing machines, fridges, cars will go up. But the stocks in the listed space have already rallied quite a bit. I mean, if you look at names like, say, an M&M, say, a Polycab, which is in the wires business, So do you think that a lot of the story has played out?
So, hard to say. I think discretionary consumption will continue to play out. Basic consumption, your toothpaste, your biscuits may be less, but I think discretionary consumption will continue to play out structurally. Now, could there be one more muted year because valuations have rallied? That we can debate. But I think structurally discretionary consumption will continue to grow, because when you migrate from this point of $2,500 to $5,000 GDP per capita, your basic needs are done. That is when you start doing these upgrades. Your other point on stocks not being cheap, the whole market is not cheap, actually. You know, what you're saying about stocks reflects the whole market. I don't think India has traded cheap, unfortunately, very often.
That's true. That valuation argument we can, have another day. For now, everyone's sort of looking at growth, and a lot of sectors are getting re-rated, right, on a valuation parameter. All right, let's do one thing. Let's take a quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere. Lots more coming up on the other side. Stay tuned.